All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back again today. Very happy to have you all here. And this video is going to be about whistleblowers. And the main question is, are these people heroes or criminals? Is what they are doing justifiable or not? We're going to look at the philosophy of whistleblowing and the justification for whistleblowing. So, what is whistleblowing? Well, a whistleblower is supposed to be an informant who exposes wrongdoing within an organization in the hope of stopping it. So, whistleblowing is the act of exposing wrongdoing to the public in the hope of stopping it and or triggering a change in the wrongdoer's behavior. That's kind of starting definition we are going to be working with. And first, we're going to look at a story and then talk a little bit about how we can analyze that story and whether we're dealing with a whistleblower or not, and whether their behavior is justified or not. And first, we're going to have a quick look at Edward Snowden's background. So, many of you might know Edward Snowden, those of you who don't. He's a US citizen, he worked in tech, he worked for the CIA for a while and then for the NSA, the National Security Agency, which is one of the US's information agencies. Some of what they do is secret, some of what they do is public, and they usually gather security relevant data. Now, security is very broadly defined. It doesn't just mean that they are gathering data on criminals or terrorists. Anyone who might ever be considered a potential risk to um, any U.S. national institution. These might be soldiers, these might be civilians, these might be people who are not on the radar of the police or anyone. They might just be gathering data on them. So this is what actually Snowden found. He found out that the US and the UK developed and deployed a system of collecting private information and used this system against their own citizens and also citizens of allied countries. Very large scale spying against European countries occurred, and also others, of course, countries that the US considers hostile or competing countries like China, Russia, and so on. South American, Central American countries that they want to keep under control. And again, just to reiterate, what happened here was not that they were collecting data on known criminals or terrorists. They were collecting data on everyone they could collect data on. Politicians, leaders in other countries, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Italy, France, who are allies of the US. Still, they were being spied on by the US and the UK, and also civilians, their own civilians as well. Snowden first tried to talk to his coworkers and managers. He did raise the issue within his organization, and then he tried to convince them to campaign against using the new spying system. Right, so he did try to um, convert people to his view that spying on your own citizens without any legal or any other kind of moral reason is deeply wrong. It hurts their privacy. But nobody listened to him, and the spying continued. Um, Snowden didn't receive any support from people within the NSA, and after a while, he became frustrated with this, and he shared evidence about the spying with major newspapers like The Guardian, The Washington Post. I think later the New York Times came out with the story as well. And the story was published and made available to everyone. Now, based on this, the US criminal justice system charges Snowden with spying on two accounts. And account one is that he gave national defense information to somebody without security clearance, and he revealed classified information about communications intelligence, and also he stole government property. The information that he gave to the newspapers was not his, it was owned by the US government and the organization he worked for, the NSA. And of course, this is considered defense information because some of it is used against other countries or in defense against other countries as information war efforts or spying efforts or economic war and so on and so on and so on. Propaganda. Um, and today, Snowden lives in exile in Russia. He had to escape the US. He would probably face a lifetime sentence if he would be in the US. And he was worried that other countries where he stayed before would have extradited him. They would have forcefully sent him, arrested him, and sent him to the US. What do we think about Snowden? We'll get back to that. I'll tell you very, very briefly Julian Assange, his background story. He's the founder and director of WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks is a website that published thousands of important secret documents that governments did not publish before. For example, documents that showed that the US military killed a large number of innocent civilians in Afghanistan and Iraq during the occupation, uh, when the US invaded these countries and had them occupied and installed puppet governments. Documents that showed that many European, Russian, and Chinese business people were hiding money illegally in Caribbean countries. They were um, putting some of their wealth into tax havens where the tax authorities could not get them. So they were making a lot of money in their countries, but they were not willing to contribute to the infrastructure of their countries that keeps their customers and other people in their countries alive. They were lucky, but they were not willing to share their luck. Documents that showed that the US spied on European allied countries, and so on and so on. These are not the only things that came out, but these are some of the important things it reveals. Um, we'll get back to whether Assange was a whistleblower or not. But first, we're going to have a look at whether or not it can be good, whether or not it can be justified to be a whistleblower. Um, there are in the philosophical literature two ways of showing that at least sometimes it is good to be a whistleblower. If it is good, then it is the right thing to do, right? The right action is what produces good. And if that is so, then it might be a duty to be a whistleblower because, right, if there are good things, we should do them. So the two kinds of justifications are broadly the extrema ratio view and the deontic views. Um, the main claims of the extrema ratio views are that normally employees have to be loyal to their employers, and so whistleblowing is only morally obligatory in, as the name of the view tells us, extreme cases. What would be an extreme case? Well, one would be if there is sufficient evidence of wrongdoing and um, the whistleblower can report with minimal cost to themselves and others. They're not going to get murdered, they don't lose their livelihood, and so on. And what they report is really large scale. So they have evidence that significant harm could be caused. Um, Snowden qualifies so far because um, the massive spying programs that the US and the UK started digitally in the early 2010s, late 2000s, affected hundreds of millions of people globally, most of them innocent people whose privacy and has been compromised and their right to privacy, right to free speech, and so on and so on, have been harmed by the US and the UK authorities. Um, so this view has basically two variants. Um, it can justify the whistleblowing based on the harm that would be caused, as I just said, in emergency cases and following general duties of justice. Serious harm would be sizable harm that would damage a large number of people or cause large environmental damage, would undermine social institutions, healthcare, school system, transportation, food storage, energy. Um, so this is not a bad view, but there are a couple of problems with it. One is that some cases we can't really assess the consequences before anything happens, right? So it's very hard to justify with this view any preventive information leaking, whistleblowing. Um, the second problem is that some cases are bad enough to justify whistleblowing, even if the consequences don't affect large numbers of people. Think about corruption, think about nepotism, cronyism, think about cases where, for example, government officials promote one of their relatives or one of their friends or one of their former colleagues to high positions in government and establish a link between business and government that can be misused by um, those businesses and those families that are involved. This happens a lot, sadly, in all countries. Um, so in this case, arguably, whistleblowing would be justified, even though the actual damage might not be uh, very, very large. So the problem is that this view seems to be too narrow in some ways. Um, the second type of justification that this view can offer is based on complicity. So the idea is that in some cases, if you're working in an organization that does something harmful, think about a military that occupies another country unjustly and murders civilians there, cuts off lines for healthcare supplies. If you work in such an organization, your moral integrity is compromised, even if you personally don't take part or don't approve of such operations, or you work for a large company which, let's say, tries to set up a monopoly on clean water and make access to clean water harder for people in the country. In these cases, your moral integrity, meaning whether you're a decent person or a bad person, might depend on whether or not you cooperate with such an institution, and whistleblowing might be a duty, otherwise, you simply become as corrupt and bad as the organization. This is a useful complement. It's a little bit vague when we have such a duty. That's an issue. That's a complaint that one can raise. Um, it's not entirely clear when our moral integrity is under danger. Think about the following case. Your country might be involved in an unjust war. Many people think that the US war on Iraq and Afghanistan were unjust wars. They did not meet the criteria of just wars, and there were no real reasons for starting these occupations and killing very large numbers of people in the process. And in that case, are you, as a citizen of these countries or someone who voted for the government that approved these measures, complicit or not? It's a hard question, right? Do you have a duty to opt out or uh, revolt or oppose in some substantial way the organization, or blow the whistle if you find some information that could be detrimental to the morally corrupt effort? Difficult to say. It's a useful idea, but we need to flesh it out in more detail. Um, and One of the problems is then that even though the extrema ratio view offers us these two kinds of justifications for whistleblowing, they will not cover every case that seems to be a justifiable case and a case where it would be important to blow the whistle. So it seems to be too narrow overall. So what could we do? Right? Well, there's another view as well, the deontic view. The main claims of the deontic view are that every office, every role in any kind of organization or society comes with accountability. If you work in a company, these are usually spelled out in your contract, or HR gives you a role description. If you're a politician or a government official, the political system and the justice system will describe very clearly. If you're a police officer, there are also going to be laws which very clearly describe what you should do, what you are not allowed to do, what you may do, and so on. So roles have power mandates. These are connected to the official status of the role. And the idea is that everyone has to make the organization they're part of function properly. But of course, some people misuse their power. You can think of police officers who unnecessarily kill people during arresting them or engaging with them. And you can think of politicians who lie to the public. You can think of companies that push for policies that enable them to, um, say, get an edge on their competitors instead of fairly competing against them. You might think of large tech companies, they do this all the time. For any company really that lobbies, the energy sector comes to mind as well. So, of course, when people misuse their power in an organization, it's inherently wrong because it changes the normative order of the organization and it changes it in a bad way, right? It's not improving it, it's harming it. It makes the organization more corrupt, more complicit, and so on and so on and so on, more harmful. So members have a duty to use their powers of office as set out in their mandate. I mean, that's obvious. And they should also exercise control over each other, reciprocal control, right? Like if I find out that someone in my organization, maybe my boss, maybe someone who is working on the same level or different unit as I do, is doing something wrong, I should engage in corrective action. I should try to get them back on the right path. So, what are the justifications for doing so? Why accept the view? Well, the idea is that duties exist, right? We have rights as humans, the right to free speech, the right to lives, right to be free of torture, and so on. Rights only exist if duties exist as well, right? My right means that other people have a duty to respect my right and to help me to exercise it. And reciprocally as well, if I live in a society where there is free speech, I also have a duty to enable the free speech of others. It doesn't mean unlimited free speech, but at least within the boundaries on which we agreed as a society. Um, so this view does not look at the consequences of the actions or the potentially harmful things that an organization can do. It's looking at more like failing the duties. And this makes it broader than the first view that we discussed, which is benefit, it's an advantage. Duties are based on the positions that people have in an organization. So every duty, every position comes with several duties. And actually, without whistleblowing, an organization cannot work well at all because people might get away with things that they should not get away with, and that might undermine the organization in the long term. Now, in a certain way, we could maybe think of the Snowden case along these lines. Snowden had a duty, as did others in the NSA, and the duty was to help self-correct the organization. When somebody, maybe a politician or a director or manager of the NSA, orders them to start such a large-scale, unjustified, immoral spying operation the way they did, they should self-correct. And you know um, that might be a duty. Now, what I'm going to present last, and much of what I said is informed by a wonderful paper which appeared a couple of years ago on whistleblowing by Professor Ceva and Bocchiola, and they are both philosophers, Italian from Italy, and they have a very exact and I think practical, useful definition of whistleblowing. Here is their definition from their paper. Whistleblowing is a practice through which the member of a legitimate organization voluntarily reports some wrongdoing allegedly occurring within that organization with a view to initiating corrective action to address it. Right? So there are several criteria, 6 criteria that this definition posits. And we can test Snowden's and Assange's case against the criteria to see whether they are cases of whistleblowing, and then we can very quickly talk about the justification of these actions. So, did Snowden report the wrongdoing? Yes, he did. Did he report on the wrongdoing? Oh, yes, indeed. Was he a member of the organization? Yes. Um, was he in a position, due to his role in the organization, to try and correct the wrongdoing on the organization's part? Yes, he was, right? He was working for the organization, and he first tried to address the problem internally within the organization, and then went public with it when the internal correction did not work. People within the NSA did not do anything. And he did so voluntarily. Nobody forced him, didn't get money. In fact, he lost his job. He has been hounded. And if he would return to his home country, he would most likely be imprisoned forever, right? Although he did a great service to humanity. So this is a case of whistleblowing, definitely. How about Julian Assange's case? He did report on wrongdoings through WikiLeaks. Um, he did indeed report on wrongdoings. He presented evidence that a lot of wrongdoing has happened. The interesting difference is that he was not a member of any of the organizations on which he was reporting. He received information from whistleblowers who leaked information about their organizations, and Assange published that information and made it accessible to journalists and others. But he was not a member of the organizations on which he reported. Was he were these legitimate organizations? Mostly yes. Governments, companies. Um, it's interesting. Was Assange himself a member of these organizations? Well, he wasn't, right? So, in that sense, well, his status is interesting. Um, did he try addressing some of these issues internally? I think in some cases he did, most likely, but certainly he mostly went public with things, which obviously he should have done because that was his job, running an outlet for important whistleblower information, and he did so voluntarily. He didn't do so because he was pressured into doing so, or just for profit. He actually wanted to initiate corrective action. So still, this means is that he's not a whistleblower. That doesn't mean that he's not a morally good person or what he did is not morally right. Some things that are harmful for militaries and governments might nevertheless be morally good because they are useful for the public, useful for citizens. Um, and he's a very brave person, in my view, but he's not a whistleblower, and that's not why we should respect him, or that's not where the justification for his actions come from, if there are justifications for his actions. So, based on Ceva and Bocchiola, what we should do when we are thinking about whistleblowing, we should combine the two kinds of views that offer justifications. Why? Because that way we get a good coverage, right? The extreme ratio view describes cases, well, where a large scale um, damage would be done, very bad things would happen to a lot of people, the environment, and so on globally. And the deontological view can explain everyday behavior, smaller things. Imagine abuses, exploitation, um, say sexually or verbally abusive or harassing bosses. Behavior can be um, publicized if it's impossible to change it through internal measures. And these days, most sensible companies will, of course, go after a member of an organization who behaves in such ways, but sometimes it's not possible or not easy or it doesn't happen. Um, the extreme ratio view is really good at explaining the more extreme large scale cases, right? The wrongdoings of very high level politics, high level finance, banking, and so on. If we combine the two views, we get a really powerful tool where we can see that actually a wide variety of whistleblowing cases can be justified and should be taken seriously. That is, whistleblowers can be heroes. They can have moral justification for what they're doing. And if they're really sharing important information and they manage to initiate some correction or at least awareness to dangers and risks, then they have done us all a great service. So, so much about whistleblowing for today. Uh, Let me know what you think about these cases, and take care of yourself and keep thinking. Have a lovely day.